What's up, everyone? How's it going? I hope you're all doing great and you're following the 3H's of the channel. And in this video, I have encounters from all over the place: North Dakota, Eastern Pennsylvania, the UK, and many others. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, as always, pull up a stump and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. In 2011, I was 19, and I was one of the white kids that were living on the Fon Du Lac res. I was walking home from my cousin's house at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was a big kid. I grew up here. I carry a big knife. I have no fear of BS kids or gangsters or anything like that. I got to a wooded patch of trail. It was about 500 feet from home. I can see that my house lights are on. I made sure to shut them all off when I left. I kind of freak out. I have my hand on my knife. I approach my house slowly. There's no cars in sight, and I just came from my only family in the region. I own a very antisocial Aussie cattle dog, but I hear no barking, no movement, just silence. My first thought was that my dog had been killed or was dead. I get into my yard. From behind me, I hear the quietest laughter. I almost don't react on account of how quiet it is. I swivel around as soon as it hits me. I see a white, flappy blur is the best description I have of it, but it dashed into a wood patch that I had walked out of moments ago. I have this instant fear. I crouch down, and I keep doing this weird crab walk type thing, keeping my eyes on the woods and on my front door. Once I get to my front door, it's still locked, so I unlock it and rush into my house. Suddenly, I'm unafraid of a possible burglar. I lock the door behind me, and I think it's time to see the damage. I do this really slow walkthrough, but there's nothing wrong. At least nothing I can see right away. The back door wasn't kicked in or wasn't even unlocked. There were no broken windows. And I get to my bedroom. I see my dog laying on the bed. And I think, oh shit. My dog's chest is heaving. I shake the dog. The dog erupts in a fit of barking and won't stop running around. I'm trying to console her. It's not possible. She stops after 10 minutes when she loses her bark. One of the weirdest parts about this is that when I left my dog outside the house. I don't know how or who or what put her back in or knocked her out somehow. All night, I spent going through my rooms looking for something that was missing. I keep all my lights on because I'm too freaked out not to. I never did find out just what the hell happened that night. I had this weird experience when I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7. I was getting on the bus with my mother and brother. This was pretty often because we had no car. My brother was 6 years older than me, and we couldn't be more different. He's very roguish and uncontrollable, while I'm the opposite. That being said, he's still my older brother, and therefore a role model, and someone that I try to emulate. He has this habit of sitting inside the luggage rack, particularly if there aren't any seats. For Americans or anyone who may not understand, the luggage rack on these buses is a space underneath the stairs. Obviously, you're not supposed to sit in there. It's for luggage. He gets told off every time he does, but he doesn't seem to care. So we get on the bus this one morning. I'm there with my mother. My brother isn't with us. It's an awful day. Cold, rainy, dull, typical British weather. There's no seats and the bus is packed, so we have to stand. Only being young and therefore very short, everyone's damp coats are pressing against my face. It feels weird and horrible, and I think, I'm gonna be like my brother. I'm gonna go chat it up in the luggage rack. So I climb in there. This was immediately a mistake. It was severely claustrophobic, and there's already lots of wet bags in there. If anything, this is more uncomfortable. People start throwing more bags in, and now I feel like that I can't get out. I was stuck in the corner behind the driver's seat. I get this sensation all of a sudden, like I'm falling and there's light behind me. I grab onto what I can to stop my falling. I look over my shoulder, and it's hard to describe this part. It's like I'm looking down on a nice, sunny, bustling town, but no one there can see me. I realize that I'm not falling. It's more like I'm being sucked into a hole, into this sunny, inviting town. The next thing I know, someone has a hold of my arms and pulls me from the luggage rack. It's the bus driver. The bus has stopped. My mother is crying because she couldn't find me. Everyone is staring at me, like in Home Alone when Kevin screws up the kitchen. I get told off by both the bus driver and my mother. They were looking for me for 15 to 20 minutes, but I couldn't have been in the luggage rack for more than a minute or two. What the hell happened? When I was 7 or 8 years old, my dad was stationed in Fort Irwin, California. He would take me and my brother out into the desert to, quote, hunt for treasure. It was lots of fun. We would find all sorts of cool things out there. One weekend, there was a big group of my dad and his friends and all their kids. It was around 3 or 4 dads and maybe 8 kids. We're driving through the desert and eventually stop by what I was told was an old mine. I was exploring the area with my brother, and I started to walk towards the mine. He says, "Don't get too close, it could be dangerous." And at the time I was thinking, it's an old mine, rocks could fall, checks out. But I glance down at the cave entrance. There's 3 sets of glowing red orbs. I say, "Dad, what are those?" Dad has a shocked look on his face. All of a sudden, the dads are all in full GTFO mode. We pack up and skedaddle the hell out of there. I ask my dad on the way back what those were. I say that they looked like eyes. He says, "Oh, those were reflectors, so people don't wander into the mine shafts." At the time, it made sense, but I know that I was being lied to. My dad won't talk about it. I can't find any info about it 30 years later, and I still remember those red eyes staring at me from the cave. So this happened over a decade ago. I was 14, and I was camping with some other people from my church group. There was about 8 people in total, me and my brother included. We were going to go explore some cave the next day. It was Cave of the Bells or something like that, I think. So we get there a little late. There's no time to do anything else except for set up camp and eat. So, we're clearing a fire pit in the middle. Everyone sets up around this, except for Bob. He sets up his tent away. It's kind of out in the trees. Bob is one of those quiet types, but he's a really cool guy. He's 17, and the oldest out of us kids. And he's also the tallest. Even out of the adults, he's huge. I don't know, he had a huge growth spurt, and now he's taller than everybody. That's not super important, I just wanted to tell everyone. So we set up our tents, me and my brother's tent. And then someone says, "Hey, Jake and Andrew forgot their tent. Can they stay with you guys?" The tent is small. It's only built for 2 people, but you can probably fit a third in there if you had to. So someone needs to find another place to sleep. I volunteer myself so my brother can hang out with his friends. And I really didn't want to sleep underneath the stars because I was scared of something happening. So, someone says, "Hey, Bob is out there all alone. Why don't you stay with him?" So I have to walk through some trees to Bob's spot. He's still setting up his tent. The thing was built for like 12 people. I offer to help and ask if I can stay with him for the night. He says sure. So, the thing took forever to set up. It was more complicated than any tent I've ever had to set up before or after that. But it's getting dark out, and dinner is ready. We had what we call hobo dinners, and then it's bedtime. Me and Bob set ourselves up in the middle of the tent, back to back almost. I always have trouble sleeping on campouts. Surprisingly, I fall asleep in a decent time. I'm dreaming about random 14-year-old stuff, when suddenly I awaken. You know when you're sleeping and the power goes off or something, and that sudden loss of ambient house noises wakes you up. It was exactly like that. It was quiet, so quiet that the only sound I could hear was my own ears ringing, tinnitus or something. The absence of sound was freaking me out. I reposition myself so I'm pretty much right up against Bob. I bump into him. He says, "Hey, do you hear that? How quiet it is out?" I agree, and I say that that's what woke me up. And then there's suddenly the sound of someone or something brushing up against our tent. We didn't even hear anyone approach. Me and Bob huddle closer. Whatever it was has now circled the tent about 3 times and is brushing up against it each time it does. We were trying to figure out what the hell was brushing up against our tent. None of them would screw around like this. There's nobody that's really a prankster at our church group. Plus, it's super late at night. And suddenly, the shape of a massive hand presses on the tent. And when I say massive, it had to be 3 times the size of a regular human hand. We're petrified, but eventually it stops. We keep as quiet as possible, and then we hear something leaving in the direction of a nearby hill. Several very long minutes later, it starts to howl. It doesn't sound like any animal that I've ever heard. It sounded almost human, but kind of animal. It was weird. It did this for what felt like forever. When he finally stopped, the sun was coming up. I hear the sound of zippers and people quietly talking. If it's safe for them to get out, then it's probably safe for us. We join everyone for breakfast, and we ask if anyone heard the howling, and they say, no, we didn't hear anything. Me and Bob still joke about this sometimes. He thinks that it may have been some weird shared hallucination or something, but I'm not so sure myself. I'm pretty sure that it scared him from ever camping again because he never went out with us after that. So I've been lurking around the internet for quite a while now. I figured I'd finally have the guts to come forward and talk about the stuff that I saw. So of course, it's something that happened when I was hiking in the local woods. These woods are not owned by anyone, they're just kind of there. They're very scenic and really pretty. If I had to estimate, it's about 100 to 200 acres of just uninhabited rolling hills. I decided after I'm pretty deep in to do some shooting with my SKS. I brought another gun as well, just to screw around with it. I had food and water, etc., etc. I also have a small single-person tent with a tarp to lay over it in case of rain. So fast forward about 2 hours of me milling about, shooting random stuff and trying to find a campsite. Eventually, I find one, and I make a warm fire. Recently before this, I had just gone out and bought myself a TLR-1HL for the other gun, which is a SIG, and I decided that I was bored of mundane stuff, and I was going to go screw around a little bit deeper in the woods with my gun. And after firing off a few rounds, I get kind of bored, so I go back to camp and I snuff out the fire. I pull out my copy of 1984 and I begin reading from chapter 2. And then I hear something. It's weird dragging noises. It sounds like someone or something is breathing really heavy up by my tent. I peek out of my small mesh window. There is something dragging what looks to be a deer through the woods. My jaw drops, but as fast as I open my mouth, I close it. It's bipedal. It has a snout that's much bigger than any person I've ever seen. I'm so confused. And then after looking at it, I begin to realize just what this thing is. It has beady yellow eyes that begin scanning my campsite. At this point, I'm absolutely shitting myself and praying to every god that I can think of. I hear a wet thump, then the sounds of some footsteps wandering away from me in the campsite. I don't sleep that night. I sat upright, SKS in hand, P320 next to me. I waited till around 10 a.m. to actually leave the tent. I was still terrified. As soon as I exit the tent, there's this smell of like a dirty, dead air house, and you mix it with a sewage processing plant. I cannot find where the deer went. After looking around though, I find it alright. This thing from last night suspended it up in a tree. I begin to freak out a little bit, and there's these weird ass multi-animal footprints. It's almost like a dog print and a deer print combined. I decide that I may as well follow it. Context: this was in eastern Pennsylvania. I've moved since then. Years have passed, and there were a whole lot of abandoned coal mines that had since collapsed or been destroyed or sealed off. I followed the weird footprints all the way through to a mine. There was the same sleazy smell as before. I looked down into the mine, and I shined my TLR into it. There's empty blackness, until, at the very end, it splits off into a three-way junction. I consider going down there, and I think, well, I've come this far, right? Wrong. I enter the mine. The stench gets unbearable. I use earplugs as nose plugs, and after some time, I get down to the junction. The left is dark, but makes a sharp left and seemingly descends. The right is also dark, but instead it continues around a corner on what I can assume was a minecart track at some point in time. I decide to go right. As soon as I turn the corner, there's this massive roar, combined with a howling or something like that, combined with mass amounts of fast and heavy footsteps coming up from the left descent. I decide that I'm done sticking around. I'm done investigating. I need to get the hell out of here. I sprint at what I think was an Olympic level out of the mine. I still hear this thing hunting me down, grunting, panting, making all sorts of weird and bizarre noises. But somehow, I gap it. I think it let me. I spin, and I fire 4 9mm HP down at this thing. It hits something. I hear a yelp, and then it runs back into the mine. I hoof it back to camp. I pack all my important stuff and book it out of the woods as fast as I can. I ask the police to go check it out. They say that they found a mine and my gear back there, but the mine had been collapsed. This was years ago now. I have changed jobs and I ended up being forced to move west to Arizona. I sold my SKS and my P320. I still refuse to go back there. The only time I actually go back there is to visit my folks who still live there. I've lived in North Dakota my whole life. The Dakotas combined are nearly as big as Texas and have less than 2 million people between the two of them. Being out on the plains, hunting, or just alone in general is one of the loneliest experiences ever. There's a lot of creepy things that go on out here as well. This all happened in about 2012. It was in North Dakota, like I said. I was with a friend. We were out deer hunting. It was a nice fall day. It just had just enough of a chill to remind you it was fall, but it was still nice out. My friend and I were hunting the area around my grandfather's farm in North Dakota. One of our favorite spots is this abandoned town or corporate farm headquarters that's nearby. There's a total of 7 buildings. There's a bank, a post office or headquarters. There's a general store, a livery, a blacksmith, and some houses. It's pretty tucked back into a fairly wooded area at the edge of my grandma's land. I've got a 1903 Springfield that I borrowed from my uncle. My friend has some 7mm single shot. We have problems with coyotes lately, so we've also got handguns, him a 38 and me a 45 LC. But enough exposition, let's get to what actually happened. So we're moving through the woods, quietly towards a blind that we've got set up, overlooking a clearing where they usually bed down. It's a late midday, the third blind of the day. Because it's approaching wintertime, the sun sets super early up in the Northland. As we move through the trees, my friend says that he thought he saw something out to our left, out towards the buildings. We stop, scan the area, and decide to see if the coyotes are living in one of the basements or something. We move up to the trees near the buildings. They're fairly overgrown, but the old road in the middle is still mostly clear, and we see something moving inside the half-collapsed stable of the livery. My friend sights in on the building. I sling my rifle and draw my 45, creeping up the side of the nearest house. The thing inevitably moves again, and my friend swears and yells. His gun thunders. I don't see exactly what was in the building or what he was pointing at, but I hear this ungodly shriek. I freeze in place, and my friend yells something akin to, "Holy shit, I think I just shot someone." He reloads, slings his gun, and comes over to me, 38 in hand. We exchange a look, and after a couple seconds, we sack up and go around the corner, guns up. And what we're met with is a big, and I mean big, shape out in the trees about 25 yards away, and moving away very quickly. I'll be honest, I wanted to turn around and run away. My friend and I stop in place and quickly hash out our options. Then suddenly, we hear a voice that sounds almost exactly like his when he shouted F out amongst the trees. I tell him that we are going into the bank now. We sprint down the street, through the doors of the old bank or whatever the building was. There's a little teller's counter in the corner with bars over it. My friend busts down the door and we get inside. I draw a bead on the front door with the Springfield. He points the 38 at the door into the teller's area. It's fairly dark out now, and we've got half a mile of thick woods between us and the truck. 5 minutes pass. We decide that we're going to make a break for it while we still have some light. As we start to move, the shape comes through the door. It was very dark. We couldn't see much, but it was about 6'6" to 7 feet in height, skinny in the waist, wide in the shoulders, with a small head. I don't even think about it. Instinct kicks in and I pull the trigger. And since we're in an enclosed area, it's basically just instant ear ringing. My friend shoots 2 38 rounds almost at the same time, and we hear that screech again from before. I'm trying to work the bolt with jello fingers as the thing turns around and books it out the door. We go out the back and sprint through a half mile of thick woods like lightning. We dive into the truck and we go 80 down the road. We get back to the house and my grandma asks what happened. We tell her that we were at the old town. She looks at us very sternly and says never ever go there at night. There's something wrong with that place. And at this point, given what we just experienced, I'm thinking, no shit, Grandma. The next day, at 11 a.m., we go back. Each of us had a bigger gun, still our handguns, and we checked the stable and the bank. In the back of the stable, and we found piles of small animal bones. And in the bank, we found some spots of pitch black liquid on the doorframe. I haven't been back since, and no one in our family goes into that area at all. Screw that place. So, did any of those encounters stick out to you? Do you have one of your own that might be similar? If you do and would like to send it in to me so it can appear in a video, I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also down there is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And if this is your first time here, then I'll put a couple videos up here. I cover a variety of topics, so maybe there's something else on the channel that you'd like to check out. And don't forget the weekly podcast that I do that's around the same length as one of these videos, but is more conversational and more about current stories that I find. So, with that, I think that I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.